Good morning, everyone. My name is Valerie Jordan, and I'm a member of the North Carolina Department of Transportation Board Division 5. I want to welcome everyone to this exciting breakout session, and today we're going to be exploring the impact of drones and the future of medical logistics. Also, the large changes that we're going to be seeing from drone technology in the very near future. But before we get started, just a reminder, we encourage you to stay engaged with our speakers, our exhibitors, and social commentary through the summit by using our app that hopefully each one of you have downloaded at registration. So the name of the app, if you're not familiar with it, it's the Crowd Compass Attendee Hub app. Again, that's Crowd Compass Attendee Hub app. Now, at our event, it can be found also by searching 2020 North Carolina Transportation Summit. During the session, you're going to also see a survey that we're going to ask that you respond on the using of the app. So if you have any questions, we have James that's going to be here to help us out from the communications team. In addition, we want to have plenty of time this afternoon at the end of this session to take questions from the audience for our specialized panelist attendees. So North Carolina has established itself as the national leader when it comes to drone delivery. The first ever fully operated commercial drone delivery service in the country was established right here less than a year ago at Wake Medical Center Hospital. The effort is a part of the FAA's drone. Again, FAA is our federal regulations. And it's a 3-year project to start the laying of the groundwork for better integration of drone technology. So to talk more about the success we've seen with the program and what the future of drone delivery may look like, we're excited to be joined today by Rachel Karlstrom, and she is our IPP project manager for the FAA, and also Dr. Stuart Ginn, who's Wake Medical's Innovations Director. And both have such great achievements, and I cannot wait for you to hear from these guys. They're awesome. The FAA oversees all national airspace, and over recent years, that has come to include drones more and more. The drone IPP was set up to start exploring how drones can safely fit into the aerospace system. Rachel is the project manager for some of these programs, which includes North Carolina's specialized program delivery we have here. So I want everyone to please welcome Rachel Karlstrom to this podium, and if you don't mind, give her a round of applause. Rachel, come on up.
Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate the welcome. And thank you all for having me be here today. So I just want to give you kind of a high-level overview of some of the things that are happening right now with the FAA in our efforts for UAS integration. So I'm part of the UAS Integration Office, which is a branch of the FAA that is stood up entirely for UAS. You can see on the slide here behind me some of the different lines of business that support this and staff offices that are part of the UAS Integration Office. So one of the first things that came to the FAA as we realized that we needed to start finding ways to enable UAS operations was the Small UAS Rule under Part 107. So this was a new rule that we created for the use of UAS. It was for UAS under 55 pounds. This typically was for commercialists, hobbyists, and some governmental operators, and started back in August of 2016. Since that rule came out, we found that a lot of people wanted to do a lot of different things with their UAS that the 107 part rule did not allow. So we began to go through a tool that we have that allows exemptions to the rules that we wrote. So as part of those exemptions, you can see on this slide what some of the different things are that people wanted to do that the Part 107 operating rules did not allow. So operating over people, going beyond the visual line of sight of the operator of the UAS, and some different other things that they wanted to do to use their UAS to the fullest capacity and to start to get more into business case uses rather than hobbyist type uses. So a lot of things have happened since then. We have 152,000+ remote pilots registered with our Part 107 regulations right now as commercial remote pilots. We have over 400,000 registered commercial UAS aircraft. We've got all kinds of different things going on that we're using to help learn and to help promote UAS within the United States. So you can see on this slide many, many other things that are happening. We have agricultural uses. We have future rulemaking coming into effect. Actually, on December 31st of this past month, we just put out a notice of proposed rulemaking for the first one on this list here, the remote identification. We're working on rules for routine operations over people, infrastructure inspection. We now have a process called LANCE to do automated airspace authorizations, where previously someone had to actually process those manually. Now we have a system set up for it, so you can put into the system your request and in a matter of seconds receive an authorization or a yes or no to if the authorization can be granted. And then we have some specialized programs that we're working on. So we have 4 in our Partnership for Safety Plan, and we have 9 in our Integration Pilot Program lead participants. So the Integration Pilot Program you guys have been hearing about, because North Carolina is one of the government entities that the FAA has partnered with to champion that. And through our Integration Pilot Program, that is the program that we were beginning to do the operations at WakeMed under. So that's a great program. We are working and giving priority to the operators within that program so that they can get responses quickly, so that they can work with the right lines of business and get their questions answered, and we're really learning along with them. So it's been a really great thing that we've been working forward with and continuing to learn and doing great things with here in North Carolina and also in different locations of the U.S. So the LANCE that I mentioned, the Low Altitude Authorization, this is the way that kind of works. You can actually do it from your smartphone app now. So rather than having to go into a portal and submit a bunch of information, it can happen just as quickly as you would enter information into an app for another process. So you put in what you want to do, and then you get your response almost real time. Remote ID that we just mentioned, what that is it's essentially a way to identify the UAS, similar to the way that we identify vehicles. It's sort of like a license plate for your UAS. So it's not something that people are physically looking at, because obviously it's out flying in the air and we do have the registration requirements, but it's something that's going to enable us to know who's flying, where they're flying, and what the purpose of their flight is. Really important for not only our future automation with how we run the airspace and how we manage traffic, but also for security reasons. The Integration Pilot Program, these are the concepts and the goals that we had when we stood that up. So that program was a 3-year program, and it ends at the end of this year. Here's the different participants. We mentioned that we have North Carolina and Raleigh, North Carolina, but you can see also across the United States, we have a total of 9 participants in that program. Another thing that we've done that has allowed us to get a lot of good data and knowledge is partnered with what we call ASSURE, our UAS Centers of Excellence. So it's an alliance for system safety of UAS, and these are different colleges throughout the United States that are utilizing their students and their programs to help research things for us that'll help promote UAS and UAS integration. UAS Traffic Management is one of the things that is something we're still working on. We have the LANCE, we have the remote ID, we have registration requirements, but we know we need more. So before we can have UAS flying out beyond the visual line of sight of the operators, we need to be able to know where they are and know how they can sense and avoid each other and other aircraft or other objects that may be in the area or in the airspace at the same time. So this is a slide that kind of shows a great picture of what we call the Unmanned Traffic Management operating environment. So you can see kind of at the different levels of airspace, who's flying there and what's happening there. So up at our high airspaces is the aircraft that we're normally used to seeing, but we could also have aircraft like the EHang that we saw here today, larger aircraft that could be unmanned going up into those levels. And we already have some military applications of things like that. And we currently have an air traffic management system for our manned aircraft, but we know that we need something different for these aircraft, especially for the low altitudes flying below 400 feet, which is where most of these smaller UAS are going to be flying. So UTM Pilot Program, we're about to start phase 2 of the UTM Pilot Program. And so that's going to be a really great opportunity for us to test some of the remote ID concepts, methods of compliance, that'll support our FAA rulemaking and enhancements to our UTM ecosystem so that we can start to test out how the use of different service providers are going to be able to help manage this airspace. So it's not something right now that we're looking at setting up the same way that we do with air traffic controllers at a federal level, but something that we're working with industry to see what the ideas are and how we can incorporate something to build something for this low-level UTM.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That is awesome. So, next, here to talk more about what the program has meant to North Carolina, we have Dr. Stuart Ginn of Wake Medical Hospital that's right here in Raleigh. So Dr. Ginn has a really unique bio, right? But I'm not going to go into there. So he's a surgeon. Also, he's a former pilot. So again, he's probably not going to talk about that more, but he's a funny guy. Anyway, Stewart is the head of WakeMed Innovations, and he also spearheads much of this effort. So ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet pilot, surgeon, Dr. Stuart Ginn to the podium. So come on up, doctor.
Thank you, Jordan. Well, thanks for coming. Hopefully, I'm also a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm threatening my wife that I'm going to go back to law school, but it's not happening. I'm really glad to be here. We were here last year, and it's always great to sort of have these opportunities to even step back a little bit and think through what's happened over the past year, and it's been a big one. In that we've gone into operation over at WakeMed, and we've been operating since March. And as both of these folks mentioned, with the nation's first commercial drone delivery service, I think it's incredible that that's been happening in North Carolina, and I'm obviously especially excited that it's happening in a healthcare system, especially my healthcare system. But I think it says a lot about how we're thinking about the technology, both as users of it at WakeMed and also just as a state. Just to give you a little bit of background about how that all started, basically we have been working at WakeMed on finding a way to deploy this kind of technology for 3 or 4 years now, since I arrived in 2015, more or less. At the time, obviously, the industry's made a lot of progress since then. At the time, we knew that there was no legal pathway to deploy drones in healthcare systems, but we also knew that there was momentum and around figuring out a strategy to make that possible through the Federal Aviation Administration and even state and local governments. And we knew that the industry was, I don't know how to put this, but sort of ready and sort of begging for a way to try. As with all, a lot of what I do for a living at WakeMed is think about and manage technology and technology implementations in high-risk environments. This counts from one perspective as that kind of an environment because this technology exists in the public domain. It's not like a lot of other technologies that can just be delivered by the technology provider and bought by the public and then put into use. We have to be very deliberate about how we regulate and then sort of how we govern this technology. In any case, we started this process, again, 3 years ago. We ended up through relationships we had developed in just modeling out what it would look like from a healthcare use case perspective. We started thinking about it from a very narrow perspective. We just wanted to experiment with augmenting our courier program, our ground-based courier program, with this technology because we were having problems with our courier program, and our healthcare system, WakeMed, has grown in step with Wake County, and so we were growing geographically and growing in volume, and we needed a better strategy to manage just parcel deliveries and small package deliveries inside of our system. As this has evolved, so that's where we started, and we modeled out what that would look like using a drone and what a rational use case might be, and we settled on blood samples because they're high value and small in size and weight, and so suited the technology. And as we developed that use case, the industry had, and spurred by the FAA and the IPP program, had developed to a point where we could actually apply to try to do this in practice. And that's what happened with the IPP. Is we were fortunate to be sort of at the table, ready to go with a model, and then our technology partners and the FAA and all the partners who were in the IPP came together through the North Carolina DOT and were able to basically get approval to do this. Even I was surprised, frankly. But that set in motion a really incredible process where all of a sudden we had to make it real. And so here we are as a healthcare system, and our job is to figure out how can we use this to create value for our patients, possibly to create value for our system, and how do we integrate that into our current operations? Because healthcare operations are messy at times. They're big and complicated and unpredictable. What we found, interestingly, is that the technology, from our standpoint, from the use case standpoint, became nearly invisible to us. And I think that's one of the things about this piece of technology that I think a lot of people don't realize. When we first started, we were prepared, for example, to take a lot of feedback from patients and families and people on our campus where these things were going to be operating, good and bad. We have gotten, I'm not exaggerating, we have gotten zero feedback about this technology. I work at WakeMed. Now, granted, I spend a lot of times in rooms without windows, operating rooms and clinics, but I've only seen it 3 times actually in operation. What I mean to say is it's an inconspicuous technology, but the implications and the importance of good governance and sort of ethical use of the technology are incredibly high, and the stakes are high for the industry. So it basically has folded into our operation really easily and nicely, and that makes it sound like it was easy to do. And I'll tell you that WakeMed's role here maybe was the easiest. We just want to use this stuff, right? We have lots of ways. We want more. We want to use it more. We have many use cases where we can put this to good use and where we know we can impact our patients in terms of care. So that has led us to really rethink the way we look at this technology, and as we've immersed in it and immersed in the industry as it's evolved, our thinking about what the technology can do in healthcare and therefore by proxy beyond healthcare has really evolved. This is not a technology. I'm going into personal opinion territory. So, and I'm saying that to Rachel. So, I do not speak for the FAA or anybody else in the industry, but really looking at the way the technology works and can work, it is not a technology that is going to supplant, replace. It's not a faster horse, or in this case, a slower, smaller horse. It's not just about cannibalizing existing operations. That's not where the value is. Yes, we can scale that to a point where it creates value for us, where we say, wow, it's a lot cheaper for us to deliver these things around the clock, these small parcels around the clock using these technologies rather than couriers, but we'll always need couriers. It's chaotic. We have to move big things, small things. This is, in the long view, the technology, the way it operates is for us, it's more of a facilities function. So it's like a pneumatic tube system. I don't know if you know, the old banks used to have pneumatic tubes when you actually interacted with a human at a bank driving through. They're ubiquitous in hospital systems, and we're used to that interface, and that's how we think about this technology. And then taking that a step further, as we think through what WakeMed, what health systems, how community health can be impacted by this technology, that's when it gets really interesting. Because this is a technology, for years, decades almost, healthcare systems have been working to push care out. There's always going to be a need for hospitals that are for really sick people or trauma or all those, you need specialty care. That's always going to be a need. But most of the time, your health is going to be driven by the things that affect you every day out in your communities near your homes. Healthcare systems have trouble delivering care on patients' terms because the scale of that is daunting. How can we be everywhere at once? It's not enough, for instance, just to use telehealth, which has been one of the early strategies. Try to leverage wireless technology, internet technology to create presence of a physician or a care provider with a patient. But healthcare is complicated, and there's a lot of things that you need, and it's unpredictable. So as we think about this technology in healthcare systems, we really start thinking through, okay, what happens if we live in a world where we can stand up and scale this technology and it is reliable, legal, safe, and relatively affordable? What can we do with it? Well, honestly, we can start rethinking how we build our healthcare system. Do I really need a lab at every one of a full standing lab at my larger outpatient emergency departments? If I can ship all those labs back and then open that space up for patient care, can I rethink deeper levels of our supply chain management system? Yes, and we are thinking about that theoretically at this point. So it really does get to a point where you're thinking of the technology more of an infrastructure play, and that's the way we think of it, than it is of a transportation play. Now, it's going to be regulated as a piece of aerospace transportation technology, and it has to be, and it should be. But the challenge is we have to figure out how to govern it from the ground up. So I'll stop there because we can go on, and I want questions about all this. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here and hope we can have an interesting discussion.
Ready? Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Pilot Attorney Ginn. All right. And again, we're going to open the floor up for questions on this unique aircraft drone delivery systems at WakeMed. I was so impressed when I got a chance to see your drone delivery on your samples. It just really, gave me more interest in this. So, and I, hopefully that, the public will be able to see this technology as well. But before we start with some of the questions and feedback and comments from the audience, I want to start off by asking the question is, what's going to happen to the WakeMed drone delivery program after the 3-year IPP pilot ends this year? Because it's going to end, correct?
It is.
Rachel.
So the program was a 3-year initiative, and the 3 years ends in October. It's actually October 25th of 2020. That's when the presidential memorandum that the FAA had that challenged us to start up this program, partnership with different state and local government entities to help to facilitate moving this forward. So we don't have another program like that in the process yet, but we do know that we want to maintain our relationships that we have and continue to learn. And we know that there's a lot of different technology and different processes and things that we're on the verge of getting accomplished, but we haven't gotten accomplished and may not accomplish before October, that we want to keep working with these people on. So we are right now working on what comes next after the IPP. But one of the great things that we know will continue is the impetus of this and purpose of these trials was to enable these operations not only for our IPP partners, but for anyone who wants to use UAS. So the operations that are happening at WakeMed right now are actually done under our small UAS Part 107 rule initially, and they were done with just one waiver that allowed them to fly over people. So that's something that any UAS operator could implement, that type of a delivery service. They would just have to apply for that waiver with the FAA. And now that we have more data and we're learning more about those things, that enables us to enable those operations. And then in addition to that, what we've done at WakeMed, through their partnership with the company called Matternet, who is the manufacturer of the UAS that they use, and also partnership with UPS Flight Forward, who I'm sure you guys have all heard of. It's just a subsidiary of the UPS package delivery company. They've actually gotten their certification to be an air carrier. So in the United States right now, we only have 2 UAS companies that are certificated to be air carriers. And when I say air carrier, that allows them to transport goods for hire, just the way that our aircraft do. And so what we have certificated them under is a Part 135. And actually here in WakeMed, they actually got the first what we call standard 135 certificate. The other 135 certificate was initially issued just as for one pilot, and now they have upgraded as well to the standard. But now that they hold that certificate, that's something that doesn't expire, doesn't go away, so they can continue to do their operations under their 135 certification as an air carrier beyond the IPP.
Yeah, I would just echo that from the WakeMed standpoint. I mean, at this point, it has evolved to a almost a vendor relationship with UPS. They provide a service that we want and need, and we would like for it to grow. Obviously, their Part 135 gives them the ability to think about expanding the operation. It's not carte blanche. Don't get me wrong, but it does mean that they're in a position with our partners to work with us to meet our need over time. And obviously, we have plans we'd like to expand the system across our facilities. We would like, and this is where we're going to decouple because what we would like at WakeMed is to be able to deploy a network of drones and routes that connect basically our hospitals to each other and some of our outpatient facilities back to those hospitals for central lab processing, among other things. And then, we have a model that takes us beyond that, even into the future, as the technology evolves and as the regulatory environment evolves, and as the governance of this technology from the ground up evolves. So we'll take it as far as we can, safely and sort of along with our partners.
Great, thank you. Rachel, you're a pilot as well, also. Wow. And so we have 3 pilots. You're a pilot, right? So all of this fighter power right in here. So, audience questions. We definitely would like to get some interactions from the audience. Does anyone have any questions for our experts in regards to drone delivery in medicine?
Real quick, what are the particular rules that you waived? Is it line of sight, 5 miles from RDU? Give me some more information if you can on the waiver itself.
So the waiver only applies to the 107 operations, and the only waiver that we issued was operations over people. And then when we talk about the 135 operation, that gets into exemptions, and there were, I think, 20 plus exemptions for that. So it's a different process with the air carrier, but for a 107 type operation, they could do this with only the waiver for operations over people.
And maybe I need to clarify a little bit about what our operation looks like right now. Right now, it's a single route that basically runs from a facility across the street from the main WakeMed campus on New Bern Avenue over across Sunnybrook Avenue, where we have an outpatient surgery center and clinics and imaging services and other services on an outpatient basis, and it takes it's basically handling all the laboratory samples, the blood samples from that facility, and just bringing them a third of a mile is basically the route. Amazingly, across that ridiculously short route, we have seen incredible time recovery. We've reduced the delivery time across that route from about 45 minutes to about 10 minutes. And really it's 3 minutes one way. Now, will that translate into better laboratory turnaround times? Eventually, but we need a certain amount of scale for that. So it's important to note that we're not flying beyond line of sight yet, more or less.
There was a question, James, at the front.
Hey there, I was just wondering what were some challenges in rolling this program out that you didn't foresee, and were there things that you thought would be a challenge that, I think you mentioned any kind of like public input or pushback, but were there other challenges that you thought would be more of a challenge that were not?
I think on the FAA side of that, one of the main challenges for us is that we had this presidential memorandum and wanted to move very quickly with it. So we changed some of our typical processes, and also we didn't really have a process developed for UAS. So what we did is we took our existing 135 air carrier certification, which we use for manned aircraft, and kind of did the square hole round peg and tried to fit this into it. And that's where we found, that we needed to do a lot of different exemptions to be able to make it make sense and work. So that took time to figure out how to do that. But I think now that we've gotten through that process with a couple different operators, it's going to be a lot smoother for people coming after that.
I would say, and I try to think about this from sort of the industry side perspective, potential users. Maybe two things. One is what Rachel said. And from a regulatory, and this is based on my knowledge of the aviation side of things, based on my prior life, the square peg round hole analogy is a really good one. And this defines this technology, in my opinion. This is, and I mentioned before that I think of this more as an infrastructure technology than I do as an aviation technology, and I think that's very true. So that makes it very difficult to figure out how to govern and regulate. So there's that. They're being really creative, and the FAA has been incredibly responsive. And now I'm a person who has worked with the FDA a lot, and the FAA. And categorically, I can tell you, there were those in the industry, the technology providers, that were shocked by how slow everything was happening. But that's because a lot of them initially were tech companies, and they're used to sort of blitz scaling and really going fast, and they're not used to deploying their technologies in a public space, or they don't care. Now, I'm not saying that's the way our partners treated it. I think the reason our partners were on board is because they did not have that mentality. So I think there's that piece. And then the second big thing is we were working with, so you have a healthcare system we just want to use it. We look at our role as figuring out that integration piece and sort of being responsible for sort of stewardship of it, and how do we balance pushing the innovation piece forward versus, being responsible. And then you've got Matternet, a startup building drones from California, or they keep being called a Swiss company. They're not. But either way, a small, growing, scrappy startup with limited resources, especially at first, trying to figure out how it's going to keep building its technology and stay alive, increase its runway, all the startup things. And then you've got UPS. I don't have to tell you who UPS is. Putting all those people, all those different enterprises together and getting them on the same page on everything from operations to sort of the technology side, it was incredibly challenging. But I think that's normal when you've got different size organizations all working together. Everybody's got different priorities. We tried to let the use case drive it, but that's just my perspective. So.
Questions?
As a physician working in a healthcare facility, and hearing the timelines that have been predicted over the last couple of days, and seeing the video from UPS, do you have concerns about when the technology is in place, which obviously it pretty much is, and with some caveats here or there? I guess my concern is safety for if we're talking about lab to lab, if we're talking about facility to facility, that's one thing. But when we saw the video and we're talking about pharmacy to individual homes, what is your thought for the future in regards to that with the existing opioid crisis, with the existing issues of theft for home deliveries of all kinds, and we've just seen that on social media and in the news over the holidays. So do you have concerns about the future in regards of this getting to be another access for folks to get prescriptions that they should not get, packages that they should not get? I guess just from a safety perspective, I'm a nurse, so and I'm also a legislator, so these are things that we're going to have to deal with. So appreciate your comment. So
absolutely, that's a really great question, and I don't know the answer to that quite yet. I will say that maybe two things come to mind. One, there are, I think as the technology and the uses attempt to grow and move into things like pharmaceuticals, it'll be a combination probably of new or existing technology applications that beef up this, for instance, the security or tracking otherwise, some way to lock in the case of a prescription. There may also just be, frankly, restrictions. I mean, I would imagine that my healthcare system and my pharmacy managers would not be comfortable moving opioids with this technology. And that's probably where we need to be anyway. So I think there will be some maybe a better way of saying that, a more coherent way of saying that is there will be operational controls put into place. And for that side, there are there's already proxies. I mean, frankly, if you take a long view of this technology over time, right now we use third-party couriers to do that sometimes. And there are companies who are doing pharmaceutical deliveries nationwide using almost Uber-like, sort of crowdsourced personnel. I say that to emphasize that this is being figured out right now already. In the end, the fact that it's a flying robot instead of a terrestrial one or a person in a car ends up mattering less to us, because I think if we're worried enough about a particular use case that we have to ask that question, we probably shouldn't be flying it. In other words, so to me, I would say across the board, and don't quote me on this, but initially you'd say, well, we don't do opioids, just like we don't do pathology samples now. We just do blood. The reason we don't do pathology samples is in the unlikely event that we lose one, and this has not happened. We have no indication that it ever will. The cost of recovering it to the patient and to the healthcare system is very high, whereas the cost of recovering and sending a patient back for another lab is very low. Now, I'm saying that to emphasize the kind of frameworks we use to make those decisions on the front end. So I think there are operational controls that will be put into place, and then technology controls. But the truth is that ecosystem has yet to evolve. So we look at it like we've got to be very careful about how we govern it, and we add extra layers of security over time. And then over time, theoretically, as the technology matures or as its operation matures, I think we're going to find that it's got a better dispatch rate than couriers, that it's safer than couriers, that it's lower risk than couriers, as an example. So I think over time, the data will sort of prove out the use case. But in the meantime, it's just adding extra restrictions.
And one of the great things is having a partner like UPS, because they've already figured out a lot of things about in how to transport these types of things. So when you think about doing this by UAS, a lot of those safeguards will still be in place. UAS will still be tracked one way or another, even if it doesn't have human holding on to it. There'll always be a way that someone's tracking it and knows exactly where it is. And they've also talked about safeguards where the people who are loading the UAS won't know where it's going to, so they can't, send it off course or something like that. There's a lot of automation built into the systems. So there's a lot of safeguards. How exactly it'll be treated with different things, will all be part of their plan when they make that proposal to carry different substances, and will be reviewed by all of the different regulatory authorities that always get involved with that type of courier. But one thing that does help build that safety case for UAS is because you can order it and receive it in a matter of minutes, it's likely to come to a person to receive it rather than be set on a door or be there waiting for someone to get home. So that's one of the benefits to it as well.
You may have already answered my question, but are you thinking bigger things down the road for UAS, especially when there's time constraints? Like, not to be morbid, but I'm thinking like harvesting of organs and getting them to the hospital in a matter of time. Is that something you might be looking at down the road?
Yes, we might be looking at that. I told them I was going to fly that EHang thing home today. No, we absolutely think that's where this evolves. And a way of, so that, I'm not sure if, I haven't even seen it yet, having just arrived, but the larger human scale, quote unquote, drones, I mean, they're more in a segment of technology and in development called urban air mobility commonly. And these are typically electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles of different designs, and that's a completely separate but evolving industry driven by giants like Uber. I won't get into what I think about all that, but the point is the technology is developing. In some ways, it's a little bit easier than drones because these are just aircraft, and the FAA will need to figure out how to certify them the way they certify current aircraft. And then the next question is, what about pilots or operators or no pilots? So that's the big question. But the point is, we anticipate that this kind of technology will evolve and become available to us over time. And we have plans, and are basically stand ready to put those into practice as soon as we can. And the organ transplant one is a really good one. I think that's a good way to demonstrate the next tier of, okay, now we're connecting two different hospital systems in a region together. That's very different than one hospital system using a piece of technology to improve its own operations. That is symbolically important because you're connecting, you're thinking more about the health of the community than you are the operation of a healthcare system. So yes, we anticipate things like that. There's actually companies in the area who are looking at that exact use case.
Easy. So we're talking a lot about drones, but do ground, this is for you, Dr. Ginn, do ground vehicles and the automation of ground vehicles, are they going to be competing in this drone space? When would you choose to go to the air versus using maybe an autonomous vehicle on the ground?
Really good question. I didn't plan it. And so that's again, we've started looking at this as, so the drone, the UAS as a technology category is just one additional tool in sort of an evolving quiver of automated or advanced mobility technologies. Terrestrial robotics are already being used in many hospital systems inside the facility. So these little robotic carts that drive around and actually replace the tube systems I mentioned before. I think Medical University of South Carolina has deployed one. I know that UCSF's new children's hospital, not surprisingly, has deployed it, but there's several companies that are doing just that in healthcare. It's going to be a lot. I think as the systems evolve, the second part of your question was, okay, are they going to compete? Well, yes, but it's going to be complementary. I think the challenge will be, how do you deliver just the right technology at the right time? There's going to be times when we still need a courier, and there's going to be times when we need a drone, and there's going to be times we need a big eVTOL like eHangs, and there's going to be times when we need a terrestrial robot to do the same job, and probably they're going to need to be completely seamlessly integrated. And there's a lot of people and a lot of interest and a lot of companies working on that piece, that digital integration piece. And this is where it gets really tricky with the aviation side meeting the ground side, right? Because there's terrestrial robotics companies that are trying to do deliveries on streets. That's been in the news. And it's not going that well, right? Because people are upset that these, just like the scooters, that these are showing up on city streets. You could argue that the drones are better in that case, right? So I think it'll take contact with reality and real attempts at use cases until we figure that out. And then it will take ecosystem development to the point where we can not have to ask that question, where the job just needs to get done a certain way.
Well, we want to thank everyone for their attendance today. And again, we just want to, thank you guys for this great job that you continue to help North Carolina to have this great reputation for first in flight. It is a privilege and an honor just to be upon, some of these new technologies that we're seeing, and hopefully with representatives such as Representative Adcock out here that can help us to address some of these uniqueness that we have here in North Carolina. So again, we want to thank the audience for your participation today. And I do want you guys to stay engaged with us here at North Carolina Department of Transportation. But guess what? We have some really exciting exhibits downstairs. So if you hadn't had a chance to see the EHON, I would love for you to go and check it out. And also we have the Cassie. So Cassie is downstairs, and that's a new autonomous vehicle shuttle. So if you don't mind also to give us some information and feedback from your application that you have on today. Again, if you can go down to our 2020 Summit website You'll be able to download some information and gather. So with that being said, James, are we at a good time that we could get ready for lunch? Again, if you can go downstairs to our exhibit hall, we have lunch that's available, and we look forward to having more conversations about the technology transformations that we're going to see in our medical industry. So again, thank you so very much for this exciting conversation, and I'm looking forward personally to continue to have those working relationships. So thanks, everybody, and have a great lunch.